We have some breaking news to discuss today as we have a massive Nick Robertson trade update from insider Chris Johnson, as a report has finally revealed some new details on Nick Robertson's future in Toronto, and it's quite frankly not looking very good. So I'm going to stay tuned for that on this episode, because for the first time in a while, Darius, we have another concrete report about Nick Robertson. We know that Elliot Friedman came out yesterday and talked about how the Leafs are pursuing a left winger and kind of gave some indirect insight on Nick Robertson. But Chris Johnson came out today and dropped an absolute bomb. So stay tuned for that. But before we do, if you're part of the percentage that aren't subscribed, make sure to hit that button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself. About 70% of you aren't subscribed, so make sure to hit that button. But Darius, let's just dive right into it. Chris Johnson spoke out on the future of Nick Robertson with the Toronto Maple Leafs and on whether he will even report to camp. We're only a couple weeks out of camp, and this is what he had to say. He said, at this stage, Nick Robertson doesn't seem inclined to sign in Toronto and is sticking to the idea that he'd like to play somewhere else next season. There's a path for him to play, given the Leafs' depth chart at left wing. It ultimately makes a lot of sense for him and the Leafs to end up together, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. So Darius, finally, we were all wondering whether or not he was going to play and at least kind of get an update regarding camp because of how soon it is. And it seems like Nick Robertson, I mean, we knew this. We made a video earlier today talking about how all signs point to him leaving Toronto. But Chris Johnson put the proverbial nail in the coffin here today, at least a 90% chance at this point.
Yeah, over the last week or so, it's been starting to look like Nick Robertson did not want to return to Toronto. And when this first happened, he requested a trade. I thought the most logical thing that was going to happen, and yet it was, yes, that he wants out. He wants a better opportunity. That makes sense, but that he would sign a contract and probably play out the year. Or maybe they would trade him and, kind of get something for him, but at least he would be signed. But obviously that hasn't happened. It sounds like, over the last 2 days, he has no intention of signing. He does not want to play for Toronto. He wants to play either somewhere else or maybe overseas if he doesn't get that, the qualifying offer or a new contract or anything like that. So it's going to be pretty interesting to watch what happens over the next couple of days, because I know a lot of people are saying, listen, if he doesn't want to play, Brad Treliving should stick to his guns and just not sign him and have him sit. But I just don't think that makes sense for the Leafs as an organization, because you're missing out on an NHL caliber talent right now where, yes, maybe he won't play for the Leafs this year, but if you trade him, you can get something in return that will play for your team. So yes, it doesn't make sense for Robertson to sit out, but it doesn't make sense for the Leafs to sit out either, right? Like, they have to get something for this player, so they can't just stand pat and watch this happen. And it's going to be a distraction for other players at training camp too. They have to figure this out pretty quickly. And obviously we're getting a lot of rumors and reports about where he may end up now. And obviously the Leafs are looking at left wings through free agency. I think they should probably look at left wings via trade, because there's better options there. We'll get into all of that, but it looks like Nick Robertson's on the way out. It's just a question of like, what's going to happen now? What is next for the Leafs on the left wing position? Because it's getting very thin as we head towards training camp.
Yeah, and it seems like a trade is all but imminent at this point for Nick Robertson there. And you look at Elliot Friedman and what we had to say yesterday. Again, we know that he said that the things are percolating out there, including Toronto considering left wing options. And then today, so a day or two after, this Chris Johnson report comes out, and things are going to start picking up in that regard. And we kind of knew when Elliot Friedman hinted at the fact that they're pursuing left wingers, it means they probably know deep down that there's a very low percent chance that Nick Robertson is going to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs on opening night. And now we're in a bit of a different situation. We've kind of been preparing for this. We know that whether it's Max Pacioretty, whoever you're going to get regarding the left wings, aren't going to be to the caliber that Nick Robertson, his ceiling is, and that is the scary part. Again, we saw Sunday that the Leafs were looking at a left wing option. We think way back to June when Johnson first reported this, we were hoping, and Brad Treliving came out and spoke about how after the season they see a future with Nick Robertson. This seems it's a bit wild to me now that he's gone. And before we get into a report, I guess if you want to consider it regarding a trade, I think the way that this has all worked out, Darius, is just not ideal, and it dates all the way back to what you mentioned in, I think it was yesterday's video or the day before, him being sent back to the Marlies for 10 days due to salary cap limitations. It started there, and then he got called back up to the team. It started to snowball with Sheldon Keefe sitting him a bunch. Like, if you really look into it, it dates back a while, and I think you were right in saying that. I think ultimately at this point, he's just fed up with Toronto. I don't think it has to do with winning a cup at this point. He just wants a new home.
Yeah, I said it in the last video. I think that really kind of made him upset last season. I think that really was the start of where he thought, I don't want to play here anymore. And maybe the relationship for him, at least on his side of things, has gotten past the point of salvaging it, right? Because, of course, there's a new coach in this year, right? Like, if he wanted to stay and kind of make the best of this opportunity, have a qualifying offer and all that, and really, have a prove it year where you can go in and take a spot. You can take anybody's spot right now if you're Nick Robertson on that left wing side. I truly believe that. Matthew Nyes is not incredibly established yet. Yes, we've seen, little bits and pieces here and there, and he's going to be a great player. Bobby McMahon had a great half season, right? And I expect him to be great. But if you're Nick Robertson, you could realistically come into camp here and take anybody's spot if you want on the left wing side. And there's a new coach there, and you can, impress him and work on your game. But clearly it sounds like he doesn't want to do that. I think that was the most logical thing that could happen here. And I keep bringing up Jake DeBrusk. I'm going to do it again. He made the most of his opportunity in Boston when he asked for a trade, and they held on to him for another, 3 or 4 years. So if I was Nick Robertson, I would stick in Toronto because there's a great opportunity here. I still think he has a very high ceiling. He's a great player, especially offensively. And it just doesn't look like that's going to happen. Now, if on the Leaf side of things, they got to get something in return. You can't have this player sit. So it's been interesting the way this has shaked out, especially over the last week or so. But now, that Friedman came out and said that they're looking for left wing options. And now this from Chris Johnson, I think Nick Robertson, I would be surprised if he made it to training camp as a Maple Leaf still. Well, technically without a contract, of course.
Yeah, and it says what you just mentioned here. The last sentence, it ultimately makes a lot of sense for him to stay with the Leafs and for him and the Leafs to end up together, but it's just not going to happen. And I want to point this out, and I'll preface it. He's not a reporter. We don't know for sure if he has sources or not. He's gotten a few things right recently, but he also is a little bit wild. So take this for with a grain of salt here. But he said breaking news, ongoing albeit early stage talks between the Dallas Stars and the Maple Leafs regarding Nick Robertson. According to sources, the asking price is an unprotected first or a prospect drafted in the middle of the first round, 2021 to 2024. So again, this isn't a concrete report. It's just a good point of discussion for us here. It's obviously, it's just an interesting thing to discuss. But Darius, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, an unprotected first or early prospect, I think that's where the Leafs should be striving, though I have my doubts that this is what they're actually going to be able to get, whether it's from the Stars or whether it's from any team. But a unprotected first or a middling first round pick, a 15th-ish overall pick in last year's draft could be interesting.
Yeah, and obviously there's that connection in Dallas with his brother, so that kind of makes sense. I could see that working out. And we've talked about the California teams too, right? But I think if you're the Leafs, obviously, if you look at, Nick Robertson's ceiling and what he could be, I think if he goes somewhere else and it's, a tale as old as time, right? It happens with so many other players. He's going to go to another team and score 35 goals and be this great player. So realistically, yes, I guess you could ask for something in that realm, right? A first round pick or maybe a prospect that was picked in the middle of the first round and somebody who can help you. But I just don't know if that's possible right now because his trade value to me is pretty low, right? Especially after last season. Yeah, you could talk about his ceiling and potential all you want, but at the end of the day, he's getting a little bit older and he hasn't really shown it in the NHL because he's been hurt. And then finally last year, he wasn't really hurt, but then he's in the doghouse, Sheldon Keefe's doghouse, and he wasn't really playing him to his potential. And, wasn't even on power play 2 at times, which I think, Nick Robertson's game is offense. So that was a little puzzling to me too. So I think his trade value is not as high as it should be. So I don't know if that's going to work out, and maybe they might be reluctant to trade him for that reason too, because they want something of equal value. I just don't know if that's going to happen. So it's pretty interesting. We've heard some other things about some other teams too. So it sounds like it's coming down to the wire here, and it's going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have you. Hopefully it happens very soon, and we can have you up to date with that because if it happens, I feel like it's has to happen before the training camp starts. And ultimately, whether it's for a first round pick, they're going to be paying for what Nick Robertson has shown at the NHL level, and that hasn't been enough to warrant a huge package back, which is the unfortunate part. But let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. We'll have you up to date, or keep you up to date, sorry, with all the latest news. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. We'll see you soon.